Hi, I'm Sarami, and today we're sewing the Dewey Dress by Cashmerette, which is part of their monthly Cashmerette Club membership program. You can learn more about the club and how to sign up for it at cashmerette.com/club, or you can find a link in the description. Let's get sewing. Let me go over some of the materials we're going to be using today. The fabric that I chose is a cotton spandex for the shell, and the lining is this matte spandex. For the fusible stabilizer around the neck, I used this 1-inch wide tricot, and I just cut it down the middle to get a 1/2 inch width. I'm going to be using a zigzag stitch, and the settings are 2.5 in length and 0.5 in width, and it'll look like this when you're sewing, so just barely a zigzag, and then you get a nice stretchy stitch. Maybe using jersey needles because my fabric is mostly cotton and it's fairly stable. It's really stretchy, but it's still fairly stable. If you're using a much stretchier fabric or a lycra, I would recommend using a stretch needle because it's a little more appropriate for those super stretchy fabrics, especially the synthetics. For this cotton, it's got a lot more stability, so the jersey needle is going to be perfect. And both are ballpoint needles. Definitely use a ballpoint needle with your knits. And I'm going to be using a standard home sewing machine for my hems and all of my seams. All right, are you ready to sew? Let's do it. Hi there, I wanted to catch your attention just for a quick second and let you know that the following footage is going to be a mirror image of how it was sewn. When you go to cut out your Dewey, make sure the fabric is face down and the pattern is face up, and you'll get a Dewey just as gorgeous as the one on the model. All the sewing steps are just the same. You're just going to see the machine on the left side of the screen rather than the right. So have fun sewing your Dewey, and I'll see you on the other side. All right, our first step is we're going to fuse some stay tape to the neckline, but before I take off my pattern piece, I'm just going to transfer these pleat lines onto my fabric using this Hera marker. I would also consider probably just ironing these lines in there. You can also use a marker of some sort, something that'll disappear. So what the Hera marker did was just put a little crease in my fabric here. So I'm gonna just iron these little pleat lines. We're not going to really pleat those lines, but I just really want to keep my folds nice and straight. So I start at one end so I don't iron out that crease. We're just putting a little crease. This way I don't have to use a marker of any kind. It's kind of like a dot to dot, but with lines. All right, so I have my little pleat markings in there, and now I can fuse my stay tape to the neckline here, and I'll do that for the front and for the back. Give it one final press. The front as well. Our next step is to sew all of our darts in the lining and the shell. So I'm just going to arrange all my pieces so that the darts are all ready to go with the markings side up on all these layers. All right, let's sew our darts here. We have 8 darts to go. All right, so I'm going to fold my dart, lining up the markings here at the waist. And I usually pull my pin out, just let it sit right there at the tip. I'll backstitch when I start. I always start at the bottom of the dart, the widest point. I'll backstitch down here, but when I get to the top, I'm going to hand tie the dart. So I like to line it up straight, needle to the tip here best I can. You can even mark that. I'll pull it out, hold it firm, leave a tail, and then I'll hand tie it. This is my preferred way to do darts. I don't really like back stitching there since If you make a mistake in your dart and you need to take it out, sometimes that can really tire the fabric out, and with knits you really don't want to do that because they're susceptible to running the more wear and tear they get. All right, so that's our first dart. We'll press all the seams towards the center when we're done, so let's get all these darts done. All right, now for some of the fun stuff here. We're gonna pleat this upper shoulder on the shell on the front. And we're gonna start at the arm's eye here at the armhole and work toward our neckline. So I used an iron to mark the pleat lines, and you can see that there's some fold lines there. We're gonna be lining up the raw edge as we go. There's 5 total pleats. So we're gonna start at this outer edge. We're only lining up these lines so that our pleat is nice and flush at the shoulder when it's all done. We're only gonna sew in the shoulder seam allowance. We're not really gonna sew down these pleats in the body of the shell. You should start seeing them stack up and line up, and some of them may overlap each other. You can see like these 2 right here. I'm just making sure my folds of the iron are lined up. I'm using really long pins in order to keep them lined up. Pull these towards us on the last couple here. So we can see this one right here is a little unruly. We really want a nice line going here, so let's redo this one here. So what I sometimes will do is fold it along the top of the pleat, and I'll fold the raw edges together like this. That'll help ensure that it's all gonna line up. And then I can place it down on top of the place it needs to go, lining it up at the shoulder here, just like that. That looks a lot better. We have these a little better than these right here, so maybe we can pull these up to line up better. It's worth the effort. It'll all lay nicer if we follow the way that it was laid out for us. Look at that, that looks pretty good. All right, I'm gonna turn these pins around so that I can easily sew. And now we're gonna baste inside the seam allowance there at 1/4 of an inch at a little bit longer length there at like 3.5. I'm gonna get all of these nailed down. Let's make sure we don't have any weird folds happening underneath. Can bring this edge up a little bit. There we go. All right, that looks pretty. All right, now we're gonna sew our shoulder seams together. So let's put our stitch length back to our 2.5. All right, let's line up our shoulders here, right sides together. We'll use our 3/8 inch seam allowance. All right, we'll repeat this for our other shoulder for the shell, and we're also gonna do this for the lining. Let's line this up. Remember to match it on the seam line there. Get your pleats to lay nice and flat, flush with the edge. All right, there we go. I won't be finishing my seam allowances. My fabric doesn't fray and the bodice is lined, but if you need to finish your edges because it's fraying a lot, you can do so. But it is a lined garment in the bodice area. All right, so here's our shoulders for the shell, and now let's do the lining. All right, now we're going to attach the shell to the lining at the neckline. So we're going to lay these one on top of the other. For the shoulder that's not pleated, I'm just going to keep the seam allowance pressed open. The knit likes to do that anyway. And then on the pleated side, I'm going to press the seam allowances of the lining toward the pleats and the seam allowance of the shell toward the back. This way I can offset these thicknesses here. Just like that. So we have the seam allowance of the pleated edge going toward the back and the lining going toward the front. And it kind of nestles in that seam, in the crook of that seam there. All right, and we're gonna line up the neckline here. We have this one little V to navigate. And we're gonna start at the shoulder, go all the way around, and we'll pivot at the V here. All right, so we're starting at the shoulder. Make sure you don't catch any of those pleats in there. And we're gonna sew this at the 3/8 inch seam. My lining edge is a little more relaxed than the stabilized edge of the shell. So I'm just kind of holding it together and not technically easing it in there, just trying to get it in there because they were cut the same. All right, so we're gonna go 3/8 of an inch past this V. We're gonna stop needle down, pick it up, pick up the presser foot, pivot, and then we'll continue on. All right, so let's clip our curves and clip our V here. So we're gonna just clip right to where we pivoted, just like that. And any of your curves you're gonna want to clip so that they will lay nice and flat. All right, once you have all of your neckline clipped, we're gonna turn this right side out. Poke your lining through the hole there. And we're going to understitch our seam allowance to the lining there. I'm going to start at the shoulder again. I'm going to press all of my seam allowance toward the lining. And we're going to understitch. All right, now we're going to press our neckline to make sure none of our lining is visible on the right side. All right, now we're going to finish our armholes. Now, if you want to attach a label to the inside of your garment, now's the time to do this because we're about to clean finish this whole thing and only the waist will be open, so it'll be a lot easier if you want to attach your label right now to the lining. All right, so we're gonna lay this out right side up. So everything is sewn together and we're gonna put this right side up. This is the front and this is the back and the neckline is right here. And we're gonna roll this up just like this toward one armhole. We're going that way this time. Now we're gonna pick up the shell only here and we're going to let the lining hang free. All right, now we have this right sides together. And now we're gonna pin this armhole together. We don't wanna catch anything else except these two armhole edges. And we're gonna sew this edge. I started on the unpleated side first, just so we can try one out first. And the reason I switched to pinning from my shell side is that my machine likes sewing with this fabric on top a little better is what I'm finding. All right, so now let's sew our seam and make sure none of these little pieces slip into it, and we're going to sew our regular seam allowance at 3/8. All right, so we have our seam. Make sure nothing got caught in there before you start clipping. And now we're going to clip our curve. The more clips you do, the better the curve you're going to get. So the closer together they are, the better the curve. And I'm going to kind of look it over, make sure I have enough clips. All right, and now we get to turn it right side out. And we're just going to pull this out, just like this. We're gonna give it a good tug. There we go. Nice clean finished armhole there. All right, now we're gonna do the exact same thing for the other side. So we're gonna roll it up, nice tight roll. Pick up the outer, and then I like to just flip the lining. And now we'll sandwich these together. Sew our seam, clip it, and turn it right side out. All right, looking good. Now we're gonna do our side seams, and that will be almost our whole bodice complete. So we're going to take our shell and lining, and we're going to put them right sides together along one side seam. So here's one armhole right here. And so I'm gonna take the shell, put it right sides together, and then the lining right sides together. All right, so let's pin this together. And we're gonna press the seam allowance at the armhole seam here toward the lining. All right, let's sew our side seam. Make sure you line it up there at the waist. All right, now we can turn our garment right side out. All right, we have a bodice. Our last step before we either do the waistband or the skirt is we're just gonna secure the waist edge of the bodice to itself so that it's a nice tidy piece and everything is complete. So I'm gonna offset my darts from one another like we pressed them. I pressed my seam allowances open at the side seam here. So I'm just gonna line up all these edges and then baste along the waist seam there. And then we'll be ready for our waistband or the skirt, depending on which option that you're choosing. If you're making the view without a waistband, you can skip ahead to where we start sewing the skirt to the bodice. If you're making the waistband, we want to create one inner and one outer waistband. So you want to take two of your waistbands and sew them at the side seam here, your full seam allowance, and repeat for your other waistband. All right, we're going to trim our seam allowance down to 1/4 inch, and we're going to press them open. All right, we sewed our waistbands together and we pressed the seams open. So now we're going to take the outer waistband and we're going to line this up to the outer bodice. Make sure that you line up the side seams with the side seams of the bodice, right sides together. And if you have a directional print, make sure that you put this the correct direction so you don't end up with upside down foxes. Let's baste this together using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now we'll take our other waistband and we're going to line it up to the inside of the garment. And again, if you have a directional print, make sure you place it correctly and line up your side seams and your centers. And this time we're going to sew it using our full seam allowance. Now we're going to press our waistbands down. I'm going to press these individually. So I'm going to pull on this outer one and pull on this inner one. And I'm going to try and keep them stacked one on top of the other so I'm not over rotating one on top of the other. So pull this, and then line up those raw edges. Sometimes I'll hold the raw edges together and pull the bodice. So we really want to keep that seam stacked right on top of itself. Now we'll baste these two raw edges together, and we'll do so with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now we're ready to sew our skirt on. Time for more darts. We're going to sew the 2 back darts. All right, we'll press our darts towards center back. All right, we'll set that aside. So now we're gonna work on piece 7, which is the front skirt overlayer, and I'm gonna put some creases using the iron again for my pleats before we take the pattern piece off. All right, I pinned all the way around this little area so it wouldn't shift, and now I'm just going to give myself a guide. It might be more intuitive to do this from the back side, put the pattern piece on the fabric face down. I'm going to start the ironing from the side seam so that I don't accidentally iron out my pleats that I've already ironed. Let's go to each crease. I'm going to keep my pattern handy so I can make sure I'm getting all of them in there too. Got this one, this is one pleat. I'm going to hem this vertical and bottom edge of my dress here. It doesn't fray, but I would like that look. So I'm gonna iron this at 3/8 of an inch. I'm gonna do this bottom curved edge as well. All right, while I'm here, I'm going to iron up the hem for the other front, which is just this curved bottom edge. All right, I'm gonna hem my piece 7, and I'm gonna start with the vertical edge first. Stitch it from the right side. The slightly wider zigzag. You can use a cover stitch as well, or your other favorite way to hem your knits if you need to and it's fraying. When I get to this corner, I'm just gonna fold it up and turn the corner there. All right, now we get to have some more pleating fun. 2 of my fold lines here, they are going to 1 notch. So let's look at the back here. You can see the pleat markings. We have 1 pleat, 1 pleat, 1 pleat, 1 pleat. And we're gonna put these 2 together and then these 2 together, but on the right side. So I'm gonna put it sideways to me so I can really get a nice fold. So I'm gonna pleat to this one first, like this, and we're gonna line up all of our raw edges. Now I'm gonna flip it over and do this other one, because our first pleat is an inverted pleat. And line up our raw edge at the top, All right, and we'll continue with the outer two going towards the first pleats. Line up all those raw edges. Your pleats are going to stack upon one another. So I'm going to do a double pin here because I have the pleat going on top of this one and I have this back here. So I just want to stabilize it the best I can. And we'll evaluate it at the end to make sure everything's lining up the way we want. So we want these raw edges lined up here, as well as the pleat length. And I'll do 2 pins on this one as well. All right, and see this right here, I have a little jog, so let's work on this one a little bit. I may have to unpin this one so I can pull this down and then pull this up. There we go. All right, now let's baste all this in place. All right, we're gonna use a 1/4 inch seam allowance while we baste this. And make sure all your raw edges are lined up. It's our last pleats to do, so it's worth the effort. And get everything lined up here, nice and flat. Don't let anything skew. Knit can be pretty squishy, so sometimes what'll happen is you'll have it all lined up, and as you get there, just the pressure of your presser foot is gonna kind of push things and smush them out of the way. So just try and do your best to keep it all lined up. All right, there we go. All right, if you need to hem your other front, let's do so now. I've already pre-ironed my edge here. So we're just hemming the bottom edge. My zigzag. Now we're going to lay the overskirt on top of this underskirt. And your hemmed edge is going to go right up to that notch on the waist. And we're going to want to keep all these raw edges lined up. Match your centers and your side seams. All right, once you have your waist lined up and your side seam, we're going to baste these together. All right, so I'm going to start on the lower side seam. So here's the hem of the overskirt. And here is the hem of the underskirt. And we're going to start there with the basting. We have a front skirt now. So now let's line up our back skirt to our front skirt along the side seams, and we'll sew those together. So we have our front skirt here, and now we're going to lay our back skirt on top, lining up our side seams, and we're going to sew our side seams together. Now the hem of the back is going to be longer than the side seams. I'm going to use my ironing board to line it all up. Don't want to catch this in our side seam, that overskirt hemmed edge. So let's line up our side seam here. Let's sew our side seams together. We're getting close to the end now. I put my stitch length back to a non-basting length. So when I get down here, because I plan on hemming my back skirt, I'm going to fold it up and I'm going to sew it to the seam here like this. And then when I go to hem it, I'm going to get a nice clean edge here at the hem, just like this. So if you don't want that, you can just sew it regular and then turn up your hem afterward. Now let's do the other side seam. I'm going to iron up my hem and then we'll hem the back. The hem allowance on the back is 1.5 inches. Mine's a little bit lopsided, but I'm sticking with my side seams. I'm just feeling the ridge under there. And I think what I'll do is I'll hem it an even width and I'll just trim off the excess or leave it. There we go. Now we have a skirt and we have a bodice. Let's put them together and make a dress. Moment of truth, we're gonna have a dress in just one more step. So let's take our skirt, keep it inside out, and then we'll take our bodice right side out. And I have my front skirt on top and my front bodice on top. And we're just gonna slip this inside here, lining up our side seams. If you have the waistband or no waistband, the steps are the same. So we'll line up our side seams and our centers. And then we'll sew this at our regular seam allowance and we're done. All right, let's double check all our pleats look good. Yeah, they do. Oof, hubba hubba. This dress is cute. Well, I hope you love yours as much as I love mine. Thanks for sewing with me, and I'll see you next time.